They laughed at her rustic Christmas card, passing it around like a joke. Elaine Carter, 70, kept her smile steady and her secret closer. Her son and his wife didn't notice when she left the table for a moment. By dessert, the card was gone, along with every chance they had at her $7 estate. She'd spent a lifetime being overlooked. Tonight, she made sure they never saw her coming. And when the will was read, the punchline would be theirs to swallow. I'm curious, where in the world are you joining us from? Drop your city or country in the comments and make sure you're subscribed for all the latest updates. They scoffed at my handmade card while I watched them dismiss me like I was invisible. Elaine's hands moved with the slow precision of someone who understood that care could live inside paper. The card lay open on her kitchen table. A rectangle of cream stock softened with watercolor washes. She'd painted a small sprig of holly in the corner, its berries bright against the muted background, then inked a message in her looping hand, wishing you warmth that outlasts the season. A gold ribbon tied it shut, not glossy store-bought shine, but frayed satin from her sewing drawer, the kind that had history. She pressed the knot flat, smoothing it as if it might hold more than decoration, maybe dignity, maybe hope. By the time she arrived at Williams, the air inside the house was thick with cinnamon, pine, and the warm static of overlapping voices. Coats were shed, cheeks kissed, wine glasses pressed into palms. Beneath the tree, gifts lay in regimented order, glossy paper gleaming under white lights. When her turn came, she handed William the card, both hands offering it as if that might steady the quiet in her chest. He turned it over, eyebrows lifting faintly. "It's so rustic, Mom," he said. The words stretched just enough to mean something else. Jade, his wife, leaned in for a glance and gave a polite little laugh, the kind that drifts away before it reaches anyone's eye. Elaine smiled, thin but steady. She waited for gratitude, a thank you, even a nod. But the moment passed, swallowed by the rustle of other packages beating unwrapped. Abby, her granddaughter, scampered over for a quick hug. Elaine bent low, breathing in the scent of peppermint shampoo. "Merry Christmas, darling," she whispered. Abby returned the embrace, but her gaze was already shifting toward the tower of presents. In an instant she was gone, claimed by the glow of newer, brighter things. Elaine sat back, the chatter around her reforming without her. She sipped at her wine, watching them laugh at jokes that didn't reach her end of the sofa. Lorraine, seated nearby, leaned close. "They don't see me," Elaine murmured. Lorraine's brow furrowed. "I see you," she said quietly, her hand brushing Elaine's, but the room had already moved on. Later, as dessert plates clinked and coffee steamed, Elaine reached into her bag. The card was still there, but now it carried something extra. She'd slipped in a folded sheet of paper, its words written in the same careful ink as before, but meant for no family member's eye. The final line was simple. "Some gifts are meant for the heart, not the mantelpiece." She closed the card again, her fingers resting on the soft ribbon. Around her, conversation swelled and faded, as unmindful as the time. When the bill arrived, the server approached, young, bright-eyed, hair pulled back with a tidy clip. She placed the folder on the table between William and Jade, waiting for the subtle nod that meant she could leave it there. Elaine caught her glance instead. "Thank you," she said warmly, "for looking after us tonight." The server smiled politely, half bowing before stepping back. Elaine rose, gathering her coat. No fanfare, no goodbyes yet. She reached for the card, tucking it into her palm. The ribbon's fray brushed against her wrist as she moved. The table was busy with chatter, discussions about flights, recipes, and January gym plans. Nobody noticed her step toward the edge of the room. At the server's station, where menus leaned against a jar of pens, Elaine placed the card face up, her fingertips lingering just long enough to press it flat against the wood. The young woman glanced up from her receipts. Elaine's smile was soft but intent. "Merry Christmas," she said. Then she turned, walking back toward the laughter she no longer needed to join. She slipped the card into the server's hand before she left the table, quietly rewriting the night in a way no one there would understand until much later. They checked chairs, but I was already gone. Elaine slid into her coat without a sound. The chair eased back into place, leaving no sign she'd been there at all. She walked toward the foyer, where the faint scent of pine mingled with the colder air seeping from the entrance. The door opened with a muted chime. She stepped into the night without looking back. Inside, William's voice carried over the clink of dessert spoons. Where's Mom? Jade didn't glance up from her coffee. Probably slipped off. She does that when she's judging. A couple of polite laughs followed, meant to close the subject. In the parking lot, the lamps cast slow-moving shadows across the frost-dusted pavement. Elaine's breath hung in small clouds as she unlocked her car. Before she could start the engine, her phone buzzed. Lorraine, you all right? I'm fine, Elaine said. Her tone was light but final. Merry Christmas. The pause on the other end stretched a beat too long. Merry Christmas, Lorraine replied, softer now. Back in the dining room, the family would finish wine, skip photographs, and leave without marking the absence at the table. At home, Elaine switched on one lamp, leaving the rest of the house in a muted half-light. She stood by the window for a moment, looking at the dark glass that reflected her back to herself. Lined, composed, unshaken. The card was gone, carried off into another life. She let herself picture the young server discovering it later. Maybe surprised, maybe smiling. But she didn't linger. She set her tea on the desk and picked up the phone. Evening, Elaine, said her financial advisor. I want to confirm the alterations. Keys clicked faintly through the receiver. Primary distributions adjusted. Secondary beneficiary removed. Correct? Yeah. And now transfer the amount we discussed into a new trust. Name it Abby's Trust. Keep it discreet. A pause. Understood. When the call ended, she stayed seated, fingers resting on the desk blotter. The heat from the tea had cooled, but her resolve was still warm. Her phone chimed again. Lorraine, this time, you've already given too much. They never appreciated. Elaine typed back. It's not about them. It's about choice. She carried her mug to the sink, the quiet wrapping around her like an old coat. The house had its own sounds, faint ticking of the clock, the low hum of the fridge, but nothing to pull her attention away from the calm. Then a knock, soft, almost tentative, against the side window. Elaine paused, fingers still curled around the mug. She crossed the kitchen and eased the curtain aside just enough to see. In the pool of porch light stood the young server from the restaurant, hair pulled loose from its tidy clip, cheeks pink from the cold. The woman lifted a small, cream-colored envelope between her gloved fingers. Elaine unlocked the side door. The night air slipped in like a draft of truth. Sorry it's late, the server said, her breath visible in the dark. But this is for you. The envelope was unmarked, its weight slight but distinct. What is it? Elaine asked. The server smiled, not with secrecy, but with a kind of shared understanding. Merry Christmas. She stepped back, boots crunching softly on the frosted gravel, and disappeared into the shadow between street lamps. Elaine closed the door, the envelope still warm from another's hand. She set it on the kitchen table, and rested her fingertips on the flap. She stood in the stillness, wondering if the paper held only words, or something that might change the story again, this time, entirely on her terms. The envelope said, Merry Christmas, Abby, not William. Elaine didn't open it right away. The cream paper lay untouched on the kitchen table, its faint scent of cold air still clinging to it. She'd thought she would want to know instantly, to tear into it with the restless curiosity of the past. But now the weight in her palm felt deliberate. It could wait until she was alone in the right place. 5 minutes later she was in her car, the dome light dimmed to amber. The snow at the edges of the lot caught the lamplight, throwing pale glints against the windshield. She slid a fingertip under the flap, careful not to tear it more than necessary. Inside a single folded sheet, her breath slowed as she opened it. The first thing she saw was her own handwriting on the card's inner cover. Still there untouched, but tucked inside was a smaller note card, written in a quick, slanted hand. For your support. Below it, another slip. A bank receipt. The numbers glared up at her in black ink, so improbable they almost didn't register. $7 million, deposited into Abby Hawthorne Trust. Elaine's pulse didn't spike. Instead, a slow, quiet warmth spread through her chest. Pride and melancholy braided together until she couldn't separate them. The act wasn't about generosity for its own sake. It was about course correction. She rested her head briefly against the steering wheel. Through the glass, she could still see the restaurant's back door, haloed in light, the shadow of the young server moving inside. The girl would know soon enough the role she had played tonight. whether she understood it or not. Her phone buzzed. Lorraine's name lit the screen. This is more than money. It's acknowledgement. Elaine typed with steady fingers. Let them wonder. She leaned back in the seat, staring through the windshield at the retreating glow of brake lights. As William's SUV rolled out of the lot, red orbs shrinking into the dark, she thought of how many nights she'd sat at their table, her presence tolerated like an old piece of furniture, polite smiles, half-heard remarks, a constant subtle reshelving of her worth to the back of the family cupboard. Once, she'd brushed it off as generational drift. Then, as busy lives. But over time, she'd learned the difference between being loved and being included. The parking lot emptied until it was just her car and the echo of a door slamming somewhere out of sight. She switched off the dome light, letting the night fold back in. The receipt was still in her hand. For a moment, she imagined William opening that envelope instead, reading the name Abby where he'd expected his own. The twist in his brow, the way Jade would glance sideways, calculating, already forming a comment that would never make it to Elaine's ears. No, this was better. They would never see it coming, never trace the decision to a single moment they could argue over at family gatherings. It would simply be done. She slipped the receipt back into the envelope and tucked it deep into her bag. It wasn't a trophy, it was a lockbox of choice, sealed and private. When she started the engine, the radio came alive mid-song, some cheery holiday chorus that felt almost like static. She turned it off and drove in silence, the hum of the tires on cold pavement the only sound. At home, she didn't put on more light. She set the envelope in the top drawer of her desk, beneath a stack of unpaid bills she knew she'd clear tomorrow, a small private shield. She made tea, letting the steam curl upward, catching in the lamplight. On the counter, her phone vibrated once more, this time with a news alert she ignored, too tired to absorb the noise of the outside world. When she finally settled into her chair by the window, she watched the snow start again, soft and unhurried, covering every track left in the driveway. Somewhere Abby was likely asleep, unaware of the foundation just placed under her future. Elaine let the thought steady her. Not vindication, not revenge, just reclamation. The next morning, she reached for her phone and froze, the local digital news headline blaring across the screen. Young server found $7 million surprise. Within hours, strangers asked if it was a hoax or justice. Elaine's phone lit before the kettle finished boiling. The headline stretched across the local news site. Senior citizen tips server $7 million at holiday dinner. Below, a photo from the restaurant, her coat half on, head turned toward the door, the young server blurred in the background. The story was already on a regional outlet. Comments stacked fast. Most dripped with disbelief. No one gives away that kind of money. It's a PR stunt. Others were reverent. Bless her, justice in disguise. By noon, her voicemail was full. Channel 6 left the last "We'd love your perspective, Miss Hawthorne. Just a minute of your time." She met the reporter in the library lobby. No makeup crew, no soft focus shots, just a woman in a green scarf answering questions in measured tones. Was it real? The reporter asked. Elaine smiled faintly. The gift was real. The reason was simple. Generosity is a They pressed why that server, why that night, but she offered no story for their clip reels. She spoke about giving without return, about how dignity doesn't come in glossy wrap. When the interview ended, the young man looked both frustrated and oddly respectful. Her family had seen it by afternoon. The first text from William, "Explain yourself." She replied without pause. "I'm not explaining, only owning my story." 3 dots flashed, then disappeared. Lorraine called, her voice bright with disbelief. "Have you seen the comment? People are calling you heroic." "Heroes chase fires," Elaine said, pouring tea. "I was just tired of watching them smolder." Lorraine read one aloud. "Sometimes the boldest rebellion is kindness aimed where it will grow, not where it will be displayed." The family group chat pinged relentlessly. "Jade, you've humiliated us. William's sister, do you realize how this looks? Cousin Deb, is this why we haven't heard from you in months?" Accusations, half insults, threads of shame. Elaine sipped her tea, letting the steam cloud her glasses. She typed nothing. Night came slow, shadows folding into the corners of the living room. She shut off her phone, letting the clock's pendulum mark the silence. Near midnight, Lorraine forwarded a screenshot from a private group. The post, I know that server, and I know something else. She's connected to your family in a way you'd never expect. Elaine read it twice. One follow-up comment snagged her breath. She's not just the girl who got the tip. She's Abby's half-sister. Her first reaction wasn't disbelief. It was stillness, the kind that comes before stepping into cold water. She pictured the server's face. Polite, watchful, carrying a composure far older than her years. The way she had said, "Merry Christmas," with a weight that didn't belong to a holiday. If true, William had kept more than one thing hidden. Not only had he dismissed her place in the family, he'd carved someone else out entirely. Her mind rewound through the years. The small absences in his stories, names that never surfaced, that subtle redirect when talk veered toward the path. It formed now in sharp relief, a pattern she hadn't drawn before. The kettle clicked off. She didn't move. On the coffee table, the envelope still sat where she'd placed it that morning, its plain weight holding the proof of her choice. Now that choice felt heavier. She switched her phone back on. A new notification slid into view. A private message request. The subject line, "I know who Abby's sister is." Elaine tapped the screen, her reflection in the glass wearing the same calm she'd held in the library, but beneath it, her pulse quickened. This story was no longer entirely hers. The server's identity changed everything I thought I knew. The private message came from a name she didn't recognize, someone with no profile picture and only a handful of public posts. "I know the server. I can confirm. She's your granddaughter's sister." Elaine stared at the words, weighing the grain of truth they might hold. She could almost hear the hum of the refrigerator swelling into the silence around her. She called Lorraine. When Elaine read the message aloud, Lorraine drew a sharp breath. "He never told you." The "he" didn't need naming. Elaine's grip on the phone tightened. Apparently not. Her tea had gone cold, untouched on the table. She set it aside and opened a new text thread. "Willie, is Abby not your only child?" She hit send before doubt could blunt the edge of the question. The screen showed delivered. It never switched to read. She left the phone face down and stood at the window. Outside, the snow had turned to freezing drizzle, blurring the streetlights into halos. Betrayal didn't come all at once. It seeped, threading itself through years of polite dinners and shallow conversation. She thought of the server's careful manners, that look of someone who'd learned to stay smaller than the room. If she really was connected to Abby by blood, the omission wasn't just neglect, it was erasure. Lorraine's voice cut into her thoughts. "Do you regret the gift?" Elaine turned back toward the kitchen, the glow of the under-cabinet light soft against her features. "No," she said. "If anything, I regret not knowing sooner who it was for." They didn't speak for a while after that. The hum of the line filled the space between them, until Lorraine finally said, "Then you find the truth, but you do it calmly. No scenes. No headlines." Elaine nodded, though Lorraine couldn't see it. Calm had always been her armor. That night, she lay awake, the shadows shifting across her ceiling as cars passed outside. Every memory of William seemed refracted now, every kind word tinged with the possibility of what he'd left unsaid. By morning, she had a plan, not confrontation. Not yet, just observation. 2 days later, she drove to Abby's school under the pretense of dropping off a forgotten scarf. The late afternoon air was brittle, the kind that made breath visible in long ribbons. Children spilled from the building, their voices a bright chaos against the ground. Elaine stood near the fence, scanning for Abby's familiar gait. She spotted her near the bike racks, laughing with another girl about her height. The second girl's hair was darker, pulled back in a loose braid. Something about her profile's straight nose, the set of her jaw caught Elaine mid-breath. It was William's face, softened but unmistakable. They leaned close as they spoke, the ease between them not quite the shorthand of classmates, but something warmer. Elaine's hands slipped into her coat pockets. She didn't move forward, didn't call out. She simply watched as Abby gestured animatedly, and the other girl smiled in a way that belonged in family photographs. Photographs Elaine had never seen. The drizzle began again, dotting the pavement with small dark circles. The two girls didn't notice. Elaine stepped back toward her car, heart steady but waited. This wasn't speculation anymore. Whatever William had chosen to keep hidden, it was walking right beside his daughter now, alive and unignorable. From behind the wheel, Elaine looked once more toward the bike racks. just in time to see the second girl glance up. For a moment, their eyes met, and it was like watching William at 15 look straight through her. She tucked her head down like she knew I was the author of her life change. The high school auditorium smelled faintly of sawdust and tempera paint. Paper snowflakes dangled from fishing line above the stage, swaying each time the heavy curtains shifted. Elaine sat in the third row, hands folded in her lap, waiting for Abby's holiday play to begin. The house lights dimmed, children in scarves and felt hats bustled into place, tinny music swelling from the speakers. Elaine's eyes found Abby instantly, center stage in a blue scarf, delivering her lines with a confidence that warmed her chest. Between scenes, cast members exited down the center aisle. That's when she saw her. The girl from the bike rack, dressed in a simple white blouse and black skirt. She carried a clipboard, clearly part of the backstage crew. As she passed Abby in the wings, Abby lit up, reaching to hug her. The embrace lingered just a moment longer than school friend courtesy, a tether invisible to everyone else. The girl Mia, Elaine learned from a whispered program note, caught her gaze in the audience. And in that instant, her composure flickered. She tucked her head down, cheeks flushing pale pink, as though the weight of being seen was both welcome and unbearable. During intermission, Elaine drifted to the lobby, pretending to study the bake sale table. Mia stood by the drinking fountain, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear, avoiding Elaine's eyes. Elaine approached, her tone gentle, coaxing. "You're Mia." The girl nodded, voice low. "You know Abby well?" Another nod, quicker, protective. Elaine hesitated, then said, "You look very much like someone I used to know." Mia's blush deepened. "I get that sometimes," she murmured. It was the bone structure, the set of her jaw. William was written into her without question. When the lights flashed, calling everyone back, Mia slipped away, clipboard hugged tight against her chest. Elaine returned to her seat, her pulse steady but thoughts turning. The second act blurred. Her gaze kept catching on Mia in the wings, her watchfulness toward Abby, the quiet way she moved scenery without drawing attention. At curtain call, Abby bounded forward, pulling Mia into the spotlight for a quick squeeze before the applause swallowed them. Lorraine was waiting in the parking lot afterward, leaning against her car. "Well?" she asked. Elaine exhaled into the cold. "She's his." Lorraine's eyes softened, jaw tight. They've been living lies, both of them. The cast and crew spilled into the lot, coats zipped, breath puffing in the cold. Mia emerged beside Abby, their laughter curling into the air. Elaine stepped forward, before she could second-guess herself. "Mia," she called gently. The girl paused, Abby's brows knit in mild confusion. Elaine reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. She pressed it into Mia's hand, firm enough to anchor it there. "You deserve love from both of them," she said, each word steady, deliberate. Mia's fingers closed around the note. Her eyes lifted then, wet but unblinking, the recognition settling in as if she'd been waiting for anyone to say it aloud. Abby looped her arm through Mia's, tugging her toward the row of cars. They went together, shoulders brushing, two halves of a secret neither had chosen to keep. Elaine stood by Lorraine's car, watching until they disappeared into the crowd. She didn't feel lighter, but she felt aligned as if a missing piece had been slid into place. The wind picked up, scattering a few loose playbills across the asphalt. Lorraine opened the passenger door. "What happens now?" Elaine glanced toward the school doors. "Now," she said quietly, "I listen." Her phone buzzed as she settled into the seat. The number wasn't saved, but the area code was familiar. She swiped to answer. "Elaine? It's Martha. Williams." The voice was calm, almost rehearsed. "We should meet. There's something you need to hear." Elaine looked out at the darkened school windows, Mia's face still vivid in her mind. She asked, but she already sensed the answer might rewrite everything she thought she knew about her family. She waited in silence and then spoke truths I had never heard. The cafe smelled faintly of burnt espresso and rain-damp wool. Elaine arrived 10 minutes early, taking a corner booth where the window framed a gray afternoon. She kept her coat on, hands wrapped around a mug that was still too hot to drink. Martha entered without scanning the room. She seemed to know exactly where Elaine would be. A long scarf hung loose over her sweater, and her hair was pulled into a knot that had started to fray. She slid into the seat across from Elaine and set a leather folder on the table. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the hiss of the milk steamer behind the counter. "Mia's mine," Martha said finally, and William's. Elaine didn't flinch, though the words landed heavy. "He never acknowledged her," Martha went on. "Not once. Not to his wife. Not to your family. And Jade? She pretends Mia doesn't exist. It's easier that way for them." Elaine's fingers tightened on the mug. "I heard about the gift," Martha said softly. $7 million into Abby's trust. You don't know what that did for Mia." Elaine's brow furrowed. "She wasn't the one." Martha gave a small, knowing smile. "It doesn't matter. Word traveled. The girl you gave that envelope to? She told Mia. Said it was the first time anyone from your side of the family treated her like she mattered." Something in Elaine's chest loosened and ached at the same time. "It wasn't pity," she murmured. "I know," Martha said. "It was dignity, and no one's ever given her that." Elaine felt the sting in her eyes before she could stop it. She blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, quiet, unhurried. Martha reached for the folder. "You should see that." Inside were copies of paternity tests, dates, signatures, clinical certainty. Beneath them, old letters from William, half-written, never sent, folded so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases, and then bank statements, neglect laid out in columns and balances, years of what could have been support, replaced by silence. Elaine's breath caught. All this time, he thought keeping it hidden would keep his life clean, Martha said, but it only kept her small. The room seemed sharper now. The clink of cutlery, the murmur of conversation from 2 tables over. Elaine felt her own outline shifting, as though the ground beneath her history had been quietly altered. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Then don't say anything yet. Just see her." They sat in a long stillness. Outside, a bus pulled up, exhaling a cloud of exhaust before rolling away. Elaine finally nodded. "I will, but in my own time, and in a way that doesn't break her more than she's already been broke." Martha's shoulders eased, as if that was the only answer she'd hoped for. They parted at the door, rain tapping against the awning. Martha pulled her scarf tighter. She deserves to know she belongs somewhere. Elaine watched her disappear into the gray, the folder's weight now hers to carry. On the drive home, she replayed every exchange she'd had with Mia, the sidelong glance at the play, the way she'd folded that slip of paper into her palm, a private ledger of moments she hadn't realized were entries until now. She parked in her driveway and sat for a while, engine ticking as it cooled. Resolve settled over her, not the hot rush of outrage, but the steady anchor of intention. She would tell Mia the truth, but it would be on a day when the words could land like an open door, not a strike. Inside, she set the folder on her desk, placing her hand on it for a moment before letting go. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but the preview caught her eye. "Thank you, Graham." She opened the message. The sender, Mia, 2 words, no punctuation. And yet they filled the room more than any conversation had all day. Elaine stood in the quiet, the rain still whispering against the windows, knowing the next step wasn't about discovery anymore. It was about recognition, freely given. A note from Mia. No words about money, only acknowledgement. The text came just after dawn, the screen's glow cutting through the dim of Elaine's bedroom. "Can we meet? I want to know you better." She lay still for a moment, thumb hovering over the keyboard. "When you're ready," she typed back. No punctuation, no insistence, just. By mid-morning, she'd called Lorraine. The kettle hissed in the background of their conversation. "Let her set the pace," Lorraine advised. "If she's ready, she'll find you." Elaine agreed. This wasn't about orchestrating. It was about being present when the door opened. After they hung up, she moved to her desk. The folder Martha had given her still sat in the corner, its leather cool under her fingers. She left it untouched. Instead, she reached for a sheet of cream stationery, the same kind she'd used for years but rarely now, as if paper had gone out of fashion. She began to write. "Dear Mia," she paused. "No, not dear. Too formal." She started again. "Mia." The pen moved slowly, each word deliberate. She wrote nothing of money, nothing of the years lost, or the ones that could have been, only that she saw her, that she mattered. that no one could subtract her from belonging. No matter how many tried, she signed her name simply Elaine. Folding the paper into thirds, she slipped it into an envelope and sealed it. On the front, just Mia in her looping script. The next morning was brittle cold, the sky a flat gray sheet. Elaine drove to the school just before first bell, parking far enough away to avoid the morning rush. She walked inside with a confidence that came from knowing where she was headed. The hallway smelled faintly of pencil shavings and floor polish. Lockers clanged open and shut. Students drifted in loose clusters, voices carrying fragments of weekend stories. Mia's locker was near the end of the row, a little dented at the corner. Elaine waited until the girl at the neighboring locker left before sliding the envelope into the narrow slot. No ceremony. No waiting to be seen. Just the offering. Back in her car, she sat for a moment, watching the school doors. She didn't expect an immediate response. Some words needed to be found in private. The day stretched. She went about her errands, bought groceries, returned a library book she'd been renewing for weeks. The envelope stayed in the back of her mind like a stone in her coat pocket, present, but not weighing her down. It was late afternoon when her phone buzzed again. Meeting at the gazebo after school, no question mark in the tone, though the symbol was there. Elaine read it twice before replying. Yes. She arrived early. The school courtyard was quiet, the winter light already fading into the kind of gold that came before dusk. The gazebo stood at the far end, its paint weathered, a few boards warped from years of seasons passing through. She stepped onto the path, boots crunching over the thin crust of snow. A few students crossed the yard in pairs, heading toward waiting cars, but the space was emptying fast. Halfway there, she saw her. Mia stood inside the gazebo, hands tucked into the sleeves of her sweater, head tilted just slightly as if listening for something. Alone. The distance between them felt both short and immeasurable. Elaine kept walking, her breath visible in the air, each step steady. As she reached the first step, Mia looked up, and in her eyes was not the guarded wariness Elaine expected, but something that looked almost like relief. Her eyes were cautious, but hers mine, they finally met. The boards creaked under Elaine's first step into the gazebo. The air smelled faintly of pine from the row of evergreens that lined the courtyard's edge. Mia stood still, her chin dipping in the smallest of acknowledgments. They didn't speak right away. Elaine stopped an arm's length away, giving her space. I'm glad you came, Elaine said softly. Mia's reply was almost a whisper. Me too. They sat on the narrow bench, the winter light spilling through the slats like ribbons. Elaine reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I brought you something, she said. Mia hesitated, then took it. Inside, nestled in the fold, was a silver pendant, small oval etched with a single word, belong. Mia's breath caught. She traced the engraving with her thumb. I never expected you'd be the generosity, she murmured, her voice trembling. Not his wife. Elaine's gaze held her. I chose love without conditions. The wind moved through the trees, their branches clicking softly. Mia closed her hand around the pendant, as if anchoring herself to it. A buzz broke the moment. Elaine's phone on the bench beside her. Lorraine's name lit the screen, along with a photo attachment. Elaine opened it, a screenshot from a newsfeed, her own face in the corner of the frame, the headline still swirling, Holiday Tip Sparks Debate on Generosity. She set the phone aside. The noise doesn't matter, she said quietly. This does. Mia nodded, still looking at the pendant. Then, almost shyly, she asked, Can I be your granddaughter too? Elaine didn't answer with words. She reached for Mia's free hand and held it, their fingers curling together. The silence between them was its own kind of vow. For a few minutes they stayed like that, the courtyard nearly empty now, the sky deepening toward evening. Then Mia's voice shifted, quieter but edged with something determined. I've been thinking about what's fair. Elaine studied her. Fair in what way? My father's estate, Mia said. What he's leaving to Abby. I could legally claim my part. I've looked it up. I could make him acknowledge me. In court if I had to. Elaine's chest tightened. She could see the steel in Mia's eyes, but also the risk, how much weight that kind of fight could put on someone still finding her footing. Mia, she said, her tone deliberate, you've already been given something no court can write into law. The rest, she shook her head. You've already been given enough. Mia's fingers tightened around hers, but she didn't argue. The pendant rested in her palm, catching the last thin thread of sunlight. They sat until the shadows claimed the yard. The sounds of the school long faded. Elaine finally stood, helping Mia to her feet. Let's walk you to the gate. The path crunched underfoot, the cold air sharper now. At the edge of the courtyard, Mia gave her a quick, almost fierce hug before stepping back. I'll keep this safe, Mia said, lifting the pendant slightly. Elaine smiled. That's all I ask. Mia turned toward the street, her figure shrinking against the backdrop of bare trees and parked cars. Elaine stayed until she disappeared from sight. The quiet returned, folding in around her like a familiar coat. She slipped her phone back into her hand, meaning to check the time, and saw the name on the screen. William. The phone kept vibrating in her palm as the cold bit through her gloves. She didn't answer yet, but the weight of that call felt heavier than the pendant had in Mia's hand. His voice was steady, but his words broke me again. Elaine let the phone ring once more before answering. She could feel the cold seeping through her gloves into her bones, but the weight in her hand was heavier than weather. Hello, William. A pause, then his voice calm on the surface, but drawn tight like a rope ready to snap. What have you done? She took a breath, the winter air burning her throat. What my heart said was right. You humiliated us publicly, he said, each word clipped, as if he were afraid of losing control if he spoke too fast. Do you have any idea how many people have sent me that article, that photo? I didn't give to the headline, Elaine replied. I gave to the purse, not the performance. He scoffed. Don't start with your moral high ground. You've made this about yourself. No, she said quietly. I've made it about someone who was invisible to you. Silence. Then his voice came back, cold. Do you understand the legal position you've put yourself in? That kind of money, 7 million, could be considered part of the inheritance. You can't just give it away without consequences. I already have, Elaine said. You think you're untouchable. His tone sharpened. I can challenge this. I will. If you don't reverse it, I'll have my lawyer file under breach of future estate rights. The absurdity of it almost made her laugh, claiming ownership of what she had already chosen to give. But she didn't laugh. She listened until his words wound down into threat-shaped silence. I'm done discussing this over the phone, she said. If you want to spend your energy dragging me into court for an act of generosity, that's your choice. But it's not mine. She ended the call before he could answer. Inside her car, the cold felt sharper. She sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, letting her pulse slow. Her second call was to her lawyer, Marianne, whose voice was brisk even in greeting. He's threatening legal action, Elaine said, recounting the conversation. Marianne didn't sound surprised. You anticipated this, remember? You executed the transfer through the trust, documented every step. He has no standing to claim funds that were never earmarked as part of his future inheritance. That doesn't mean he won't try. No, Marianne agreed, but it means he'll fail, eventually. The word eventually hung in the air like a shadow. Elaine knew what it meant. Letters, motions, the drip-drip of contention that could stretch for months. When the call ended, she leaned her head back against the seat, closing her eyes. She let the sound of the wind move through the car, dull and constant, like the hum of an old refrigerator. There was grief there. Grief for the son she still had to call her own, and for the relationship that no longer fit the shape of family. But under the grief, there was something else, an almost imperceptible release, as if naming the fracture out loud had freed her from pretending it wasn't there. By the time she drove home, the street lamps were on, pools of light spilling across the slick pavement. She carried her bag inside, hung her coat, and set the phone face down on the counter. For a while she moved through the rooms without turning on the overhead lights. The house glowed dimly from a few scattered lamps, enough to see but not enough to feel exposed. She made tea, her motions steady, deliberate. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches against the glass. When she finally turned the phone over, there was a new message, not from William but from Marianne. Sent 7:42 p.m., subject urgent, please review. Attached was a PDF. She tapped it open. The first line was in bold, notice of court summons. Respondent, Elaine Hawthorne. The steam from her tea curled upward as her eyes stayed fixed on the words, the quiet of the house deepening into something heavier than silence. They made a spectacle in the press, but now they demand justice. Marianne's office smelled faintly of leather and copier toner, the kind of scent that clung to papers you didn't want to sign. Elaine sat opposite her. The court summons spread flat between them. The seal at the top glinted faintly under the desk lamp. They're filing under undue gifting, Marianne said, tapping the page with a manicured nail. Claiming the funds you transferred to Abby's trust were part of your intended estate to William. They'll try to prove you acted under emotional instability. Elaine's mouth quirked into a humorless smile. So love is now a symptom? They'll frame it that way, Marianne replied. But you followed procedure, created the trust, transferred the funds, documented it all. We have the receipts, both literal and legal. The words didn't lift the heaviness in Elaine's chest. She folded the summons, tucking it into her bag. When she got home, Lorraine was already waiting, perched on the edge of the sofa like she'd been rehearsing what to say. You did nothing wrong, she said before Elaine could sit down. Nothing. Don't let them make you doubt that. Elaine sank into the armchair. Doubt isn't the problem. It's the noise. The noise dies, Lorraine said, voice firm. The truth doesn't. Later that evening, Elaine spread her own quiet arsenal across the dining table. Bank documents, dated transfers, the trust agreement stamped and signed. She placed the folded note from Mia on top. The word belong drawn in careful. She smoothed the paper with her palm, not to iron it flat, but to steady her own pulse. Her phone chimed. A message from Mia. I support you. If they ask, I'll tell them what you did and why. Elaine's fingers hovered over the reply, then typed, only if you want to, not because they want you to. Mia responded almost instantly. I want to. The room felt warmer after that. 2 days later, Elaine packed a small overnight bag and drove north to the coast. The cabin she rented was more window than wall, the sea framed in every direction. She kept the fire going, drank tea by the sound of the waves, and let her mind settle into the rhythm of something older than the fight ahead. She thought about the hearing, not the cross-examinations or the polished statements William's lawyer would deliver, but the moment she'd be asked to speak. She imagined herself at the stand, fingers curled around the wooden rail. She wouldn't rehearse lines. She wouldn't prepare weapons. She would tell them exactly what happened, how she'd seen someone who needed to be seen, and how she'd acted without expectation of return. Not vengeance, not guilt, just honesty. By the fourth morning, she felt the tension uncoil enough to breathe without the edge of defeat. She walked the shoreline before sunrise, her boots crunching over frozen sand, the horizon a thin, bright seam. When she returned home, Marianne called, hearing scheduled, 10 days from now. I'll have you prepped before then. Elaine stood at her kitchen counter, the phone balanced between her shoulder and cheek. 10 days is enough, she said. Marianne's voice softened. You're steadier than most clients. Keep it that way. After the call, Elaine put the documents back in their folder, slid it into the top drawer of her desk and left it there. For now, she had no intention of staring at the evidence every day. It was ready when it needed to be, just like she. That night, the wind came in hard off the street, rattling the old window panes. Elaine read in her chair until the words blurred, then turned off the lamp and let the dark wrap around her. The morning came gray and early. She reached for her phone before she'd even sat up. A news alert pulsed across the screen. Gala gift grandmother faces legal allegation. Beneath it a thumbnail photo, her face again cropped from some months-old charity event. Her smile frozen in an expression that now read like a headline in itself. Elaine set the phone on the nightstand, staring at the ceiling, knowing the next 10 days would not just be about defending her act, but defending the right to choose who deserved it. I walked into that courtroom as accused, but ready to define truth. The courthouse steps were slick from last night's rain, the stone darker in the morning light. Elaine took them slowly, one hand on the cold railing. Inside, the air was dry and faintly metallic, like paper kept too long in a locked cabinet. Courtroom 3C was half full when she entered. The benches creaked under shifting coats, a low hum of conversation rising and falling. She took a seat in the front row behind the defense table, setting her bag neatly at her feet. For a few minutes, she was alone. She traced the grain of the wooden rail in front of her, letting the sound of shuffled papers and murmured instructions wash past. Then the doors opened again. Lorraine stepped in first, scanning the room until she saw, behind her, Mia, hair down today, a simple pendant at her throat catching the light. They crossed the aisle without hesitation. Lorraine slid in beside her. Mia sat on her other side, their shoulders touching just enough to steady her. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The room still. William's lawyer was first to speak. He was tall, his suit a little too sharp, voice carrying with the ease of someone used to performance. This case, he began, is about the deliberate removal of assets from an estate, assets rightfully intended for the heir. My client contends that the respondent, he glanced toward Elaine, acted under emotional agitation, conspiring to deprive her lawful beneficiaries of their due. The words rolled off him in a practiced rhythm. Undue gifting, unreasonable transfer, family betrayal. Each phrase was planted like a seed meant to sprout doubt. Elaine sat still, her hands folded loosely in her lap. She didn't watch him. She watched the judge instead, noting the small crease between her brows, the way she tapped the tip of her pen against the bench when she listened. When it was Marianne's turn, she stood with none of the theatrics. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "this is not about the erosion of an estate. It is about a choice executed legally, documented fully and given without condition. My client owes no justification beyond the law she followed and the intent she carried." Then she glanced toward Mia. "We will be calling a witness who can speak directly to that intent." Mia's name was called. She walked to the stand, her steps measured, pendant glinting once as she passed under the overhead lights. Marianne's voice softened. "Mia, can you tell the court what Miss Hawthorne's gift meant to you?" Mia took a breath. "It wasn't money for me. Not direct. It was." She searched for the word, dignity. "She saw me. She didn't have to. She gave without asking for anything back. It wasn't pity. It was permission to believe I met." A faint rustle moved through the courtroom, the kind that comes when people hear something they didn't expect. Marianne stepped back. No further questions. William's lawyer didn't cross-examine. He only said, "No questions for this witness." His tone clipped. Mia returned to her seat beside Elaine, her hand brushing Elaine's briefly before she sat. For a moment, the air in the room felt lighter. The judge made a note, her expression unreadable but intent. Then the clerk called William's name. He strode to the stand, jaw set, eyes sharp. He didn't sit right away. He paced once, then turned to face the judge. "This was done to embarrass me," he said. "To make a public spectacle of my family. My mother's gift was not a simple act of kindness. It was targeted, calculated. If she truly wanted to give, she could have done it quietly. Instead, she created headlines. And now, I'm the one answering for it." Elaine kept her gaze forward. His words weren't aimed to reach her. They were aimed to echo in the record. He spoke of legacy, of fairness, of the supposed precedent her act might set. He didn't mention Mia by name. Not once. When he finished, the judge looked from one table to the other, her pen still in her hand. "Counsel," she said, "this court will need to consider a central question before we proceed further." She leaned forward slightly. "Does the gift in question constitute undue influence?" The room seemed to draw in on itself. The quiet so complete, Elaine could hear her own pulse. "They asked why. I answered with truth, not shame." The judge's gaze settled on Elaine. "Miss Hawthorne, if you wish to address the court on your intent, you may." Elaine rose slowly, smoothing the skirt of her coat, and stepped to the stand. The wood was warm from the last witness, and for a moment, she kept her palms there, grounding herself. "I've been told," she began, voice even, "that this case is about assets and rightful heirs. But for me, it's about people and the choice to see one when others did." She let the silence linger before continuing. "For 25 years, I supported my son David financially, not out of obligation, but because I loved him. I paid his rent when work was slow. I covered medical bills when insurance refused. I sent money without keeping ledger or receipt. It was never a transaction. It was maternal care." Her eyes didn't leave the judge, but generosity, in his eyes, became an expectation, something to be withdrawn, only at the cost of conflict. "I chose to give this gift before the attack on the giver came, before the act could be twisted into proof of my instability." The courtroom stayed quiet, too quiet for a space so full. She saw William shift in her periphery, his foot tapping against the floor. "This was not coercion," she said. "This was not influence. It was autonomy." Marianne gave a small nod, then turned toward the clerk. "We also have an opening statement from Mia Hawthorne." Mia approached the stand again, pendant resting still against her sweater. She spoke without notes. "When Elaine gave that gift, she didn't know all of who I was. She didn't ask for proof, or paternity, or favor. She just acted. And it's the first time in my life I've been treated as part of this family without condition." Her voice tightened, but she didn't break. "I can't speak to inheritance laws. I can only speak to intent." And her intent was to restore dignity. Not just mine, but her own. When Mia sat down, the space between them felt like an unspoken tether. Marianne rose again, one final submission. "Your Honor, a written witness statement from Lorraine Shepherd." The judge adjusted her glasses, read it into the record. Lorraine's words filled the air, Marianne reading them steady and unhurried. "Elaine Hawthorne has given without ledger for as long as I've known her, time, resources, kindness. This gift was not sudden, reckless, or born of pressure. It was a continuation of a life lived in generosity. To frame it otherwise is to ignore the decades that came before it. By the time Marianne folded the page, Elaine caught a subtle shift in the room. The clerk's pen stilled. Even the court reporter looked up once. She glanced toward William. His back was straighter than it had been all morning, but his shoulders had softened, the rigid line between them no longer pulled tight. His gaze was fixed somewhere on the floor, his jaw moving as if on words he didn't speak. The judge closed her folder. The court will adjourn for the day. We will reconvene tomorrow morning to deliver the decision. The gavel's sharp report broke the spell of stillness. Papers shuffled, chairs scraped, but the air carried something unspoken, like a collective breath held until the verdict. Elaine gathered her bag without rush. Mia leaned toward her. You were calm, she said. That was the point, Elaine replied. Lorraine joined them at the aisle, linking her arm briefly through Elaine's. We'll be here in the morning, she said. Outside, the cold hit sharper than when they'd come in. The sun was already leaning toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. They descended together, the sound of their footsteps echoing on the wet stone. At the bottom, they parted. Mia toward the street, Lorraine toward the lot. Elaine stood for a moment alone, letting the air clear her lungs before reaching into her coat for her phone. A new message blinked on the screen. From Marianne, verdict scheduled for 9. Elaine slid the phone back into her pocket, the weight of the night ahead pressing in, not from fear of losing, but from knowing that by this time tomorrow, her truth would be fixed in the record, for better or worse. I didn't come for vindication, but I accepted it anyway. The next morning, courtroom 3C was brighter than yesterday, the sun slanting in through the high windows and casting sharp rectangles across the polished floor. Elaine sat between Lorraine and Mia, her hands loosely clasped, her breath measured. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge's eyes swept the courtroom before she began. This matter concerns the validity of a financial gift, its intent, and whether such a gift constitutes undue influence or a breach of inheritance law. Elaine kept her gaze forward. After reviewing the evidence, testimony, and documentation, the judge continued, the court finds no wrongdoing on the part of Miss Elaine Hawthorne. The gift, as executed, was valid under the law and falls fully within her rights as the originator of the trust. A quiet, collective exhale moved through the room. Elaine felt hers leave her like air from a balloon that had been tight too long. She glanced sideways. Lorraine's eyes glistened. Mia's mouth trembled into a small, stunned smile. The judge went, furthermore, this court recognizes the testimony establishing Miss Hawthorne's relationship with Mia Hawthorne. That relationship is acknowledged here as one of family, with no legal obstruction to public recognition. The words landed heavier than applause. It was official, not whispered, not hidden, not contested. Across the aisle, William sat stiff, his mouth slightly open as though he'd prepared for another outcome, and couldn't quite adjust to this one. He didn't look at her. Elaine, for her part, didn't look at him either. The judge shifted her papers, pausing before the final note. One additional matter. Records submitted to this court show that funds connected to Mr. William Hawthorne's prior employer, misappropriated by a third party, were subject to restitution proceedings. The substantial gift made by Miss Hawthorne indirectly expedited that process, resolving part of the debt in advance. A ripple moved through the spectator. Elaine didn't move, but inside the connection clicked into place. How the money had traveled further than she'd imagined, weaving into channels she hadn't planned but couldn't regret. With these findings, the judge concluded, this case is closed. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck once solid. Lorraine's arm was around her before she could stand. It wasn't a delicate hug. It was anchored, almost fierce. You did it, she whispered, though they both knew it hadn't been about winning. Elaine returned the embrace. We did. When they stepped apart, Mia was still at her side. She reached for Elaine's hand, her voice low enough to be meant only for her. Thank you, Grandma. The word held no ceremony, but it felt like the first bloom after a long frost. Elaine squeezed her hand once, then let it go. She turned back to the table, gathering the folder Marianne had arranged so meticulously over the last weeks. She realized, In that moment, she no longer needed to guard it like something fragile. Her decision formed quietly. No more Robert's money. Not hers. Not needed. She had her autonomy intact, her intent affirmed, and her choice on record. That was wealth enough. The room began to empty, heels clicking, coats rustling, murmurs filling the space again. William remained seated for a long moment, then stood abruptly and left without a word. Elaine didn't watch him go. They filed out slowly. Lorraine first, then Mia, then Elaine. Past the court reporter packing her machine, past the bailiff holding the door. The hallway beyond smelled faintly of floor polish and winter coats warming in the air. Each step toward the exit felt lighter than the one before. The heavy air she'd carried for months had thinned, not vanished. Truth didn't erase pain, but made breathable. The outer doors loomed ahead. Sunlight spilled through the glass, bright and sharp, scattering across the marble like a second verdict. Elaine paused with her hand on the brass pushbar. Lorraine and Mia stepped outside first, the light catching in their hair. For a moment, Elaine simply stood there, letting the heat from the sun find her face, even through the cold. The street noise drifted in, car doors slamming, a bus groaning to a stop, voices layered in the open air. She pushed the door open. Stepping into the winter sun, she let a small, quiet smile take shape, not for the win, not for the headlines, but for the truth that now belonged to all of them. They laughed at a card, but I built a family around truth. The snow had started before dawn, light, steady flakes drifting down without wind, layering the street in a clean white sheet. Elaine stood at the kitchen counter, placing slices of cranberry bread onto a worn serving plate, the scent mingling with cinnamon from the cider warming on the stove. The house felt different this Christmas, lighter, as if the air itself had stopped bracing for an unspoken tension. By late morning, voices and coats and the smell of winter drifted in through the front door. Mia was first, carrying a tin of cookies, cheeks flushed from the cold. Abby followed a step behind, grinning, a paper bag clutched to her chest. They hugged without hesitation. No introduction, no awkward choreography, siblings, in stance and in smile, acknowledged by everyone present. Lorraine arrived last, balancing a camera in one hand and a wrapped box in the other. "Don't think you're getting through the day without a photo," she warned, smiling. The living room glowed with lamplight and the soft spill of daylight through the front window. A small tree stood in the corner, strung with simple white lights and a scattering of handmade ornaments, pine cones dipped in gold paint, cloth stars with fraying edges. Elaine set the plates on the coffee table and took her seat in the old armchair, watching as the girls settled cross-legged on the rug. They traded small envelopes, each one decorated with sketches and bits of pressed flowers, homemade cards, passed with care, opened with a pause before reading. The laughter that followed was easy, unmeasured. No one commented on neatness or style, no one mocked the effort. Lorraine sank onto the sofa beside Elaine. "Feels like a new tradition," she said quietly. Elaine nodded, the sound of the girls talking filling the spaces where silence used to pool. In the kitchen, the kettle clicked off. She poured cider into mismatched mugs, passing them around until everyone had one in hand. When they'd all settled again, she rose slightly, lifting her own cup. "To generosity," she said, "that didn't expect return." The room quieted, not heavy, not ceremonial, just present. Mia met her gaze, smiling faintly. Abby's arm brushed her sister's as she shifted closer. Lorraine raised her mug. The clink was soft, but it held. Afterward, Lorraine moved through the room, camera in hand, catching the in-between moments. The girls laughing over an inside joke, Mia tucking a stray piece of hair behind her ear, Elaine watching them with something steadier than pride. At one point, Lorraine crouched in front of Elaine's chair. "Hold this for me," she said, passing her a card from the stack on the side table. Elaine looked down. It was the one Abby had given her. Watercolor splashes across the front, the words "Merry Christmas," Grandma in uneven script. The paper was thick, edges soft where the brush had gone past the lines. She held it carefully, the way you might hold something both fragile and lasting. Lorraine lifted the camera, and the click sounded like the start of something, not the record of what had already. Later, as the afternoon thinned toward evening, The girls slipped outside to watch the snow pile up on the fence rails. Lorraine helped clear the plates, humming under her breath. The house was warm with the scent of cider and bread, and the echo of the day lingered even in the quiet. Elaine stayed in the armchair, the card still in her hands. She traced the paint strokes with her thumb, feeling the texture, the layers. Last year she had made a card and watched it be dismissed, called rustic, with a smile that meant less than nothing. That card had been taken, not received. This one was different. It wasn't a pity gift or a courtesy gesture. It was honest, offered without expectation, accepted without judgment. Through the window, she could see Mia and Abby leaning together, their breath fogging in the cold. The scene was framed by the twinkle of the tree lights reflected in the glass. Lorraine came back in, coat in hand. "Photo's going to be perfect," she said, smiling toward the girls outside. Elaine glanced up. "It already is." Lorraine squeezed her shoulder before heading to the door. "Merry Christmas, Elaine." The door closed and the house settled into that rare quiet that wasn't empty. Elaine looked down at the card one last time, holding it not as something to defend, but as something that had found its place. Her fingers rested on it like a signature, the weight balanced and sure, no longer a symbol of pity, but of belonging she had built herself.